Sometimes the greatest betrayal is not the lie someone tells you, but the truth they never had the courage to say. For 3 long years, Olivia Bennet carried one name in her heart with nothing but anger. Ethan Carter, the billionaire who, she believed, had destroyed everything her family had spent a lifetime building. Whenever his face appeared on a business magazine at the grocery store checkout or flashed across the television in the corner of a coffee shop, she looked away before resentment could tighten the knot already living inside her chest. She had convinced herself that forgetting him was impossible, but forgiving him was unthinkable. Life had moved on anyway. At 30 years old, Olivia rented a small apartment above an old bookstore in downtown Boston. The windows rattled every time the Green Line rolled past, and the ancient radiator clanged through cold New England nights, but the place was hers. During the day, she illustrated children's books for a local publishing company, filling blank pages with hopeful worlds she secretly no longer believed existed. Every evening she returned home, brewed a cup of chamomile tea, and avoided every headline mentioning Carter dynamics. That had become her routine. Safe, predictable, empty. On a rainy Thursday in October, the publishing office announced they were replacing every employee laptop. Olivia sighed as the IT manager handed her a cardboard box containing archived files transferred from her old computer that had been sitting untouched in storage for years. Just make sure everything important copied over, he reminded her with a smile before moving to the next desk. She waited until after dinner before opening the box. Rain tapped softly against her apartment window while warm lamplight spilled across the wooden table. Most of the folders contained forgotten sketches, tax documents, and old client contracts. She almost closed the laptop when a folder she had never noticed before caught her eye. Its name was simply Recovered Drafts. Curious, she clicked it. Dozens of unsent emails appeared on the screen, most of them empty fragments created by software backups. She scrolled absent-mindedly until one subject line made her breathing stop. If you ever read this. Her pulse echoed in her ears. The sender's name appeared slowly as the computer finished loading. Ethan Carter. She stared at the screen, convinced it had to be some mistake. Why would Ethan ever write to her? Why had she never received it? Her fingers hovered above the touchpad, suddenly unsteady. Every instinct told her to close the laptop, to protect the version of the past she had spent 3 years surviving. Instead, she clicked. The message opened. There was no greeting, no explanation. Only one sentence waiting beneath a date she recognized immediately as the night everything in her life had fallen apart. I kept the promise I made to your father, even if it meant losing you forever. Olivia's heart skipped. The room fell impossibly quiet except for the rain against the glass. She read the sentence again, then again. Her father had never mentioned Ethan after the company collapsed. Ethan had never defended himself. He had simply disappeared from her life without a single word. But now, glowing from the old laptop screen like a ghost refusing to stay buried, was a sentence capable of unraveling every memory she had trusted for the last 3 years. And below that first line, there were thousands more words she had never seen. Olivia could not pull her eyes away from the glowing screen. The sentence refused to leave her mind. I kept the promise I made to your father, even if it meant losing you forever. It did not sound like the man she had spent 3 years blaming. It did not sound arrogant or calculating. It sounded exhausted. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table as she continued reading. If you are reading this, then something happened that I never expected. Maybe you found this by accident. Maybe fate finally decided you deserved the truth. I wanted to tell you so many times, but every promise has a price, and I chose to pay mine in silence. Olivia felt her throat tighten. She remembered that terrible autumn afternoon as though it had happened yesterday. Her father had come home carrying a cardboard box filled with family photographs, framed awards, and a small brass nameplate that had once rested on his office door. Bennett Manufacturing had closed before sunset. More than 100 employees had gathered outside the building, confused and heartbroken. Reporters surrounded the entrance. Cameras flashed. Then a black luxury sedan pulled to the curb. Ethan Carter stepped out wearing a dark navy suit, surrounded by attorneys and executives. Olivia had been standing across the street, watching through tears. She had seen him walk into the building. She had watched him leave nearly an hour later without speaking to anyone. By the next morning, every newspaper headline announced that Carter Dynamics had acquired the company. The story had written itself in her mind before anyone else could explain it. Billionaire buys struggling manufacturer. Local family loses everything. Ruthless business victory. She had never questioned it because every headline agreed with the pain she already felt. 2 weeks later, Ethan had tried calling her. She rejected every call. Then flowers arrived outside her apartment. She threw them away without reading the card. A handwritten letter came next. She returned it unopened. Eventually, the calls stopped. The silence became permanent, and she accepted it as proof that he had never truly cared. Yet the words on the screen painted an entirely different man. You probably believe I chose money over people. I wish it had been that simple. I wish you had yelled at me one last time instead of looking at me with disappointment. That expression has followed me every day since. Olivia closed her eyes. She could still picture that final look. She had stared directly at Ethan from across the sidewalk while rain soaked through her jacket. He had looked back for only a moment before lowering his eyes. She had interpreted that single gesture as guilt, but now she wondered if it had been something else entirely. Her heart pounded faster as she scrolled farther down the message. Attached beneath the email was a single file she had never noticed before. It was labeled simply, "For Olivia. Only if the truth is finally allowed." Her cursor hovered over it while the rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the window. Like impatient fingertips. Whatever waited inside that file had been hidden for 3 years, and somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered that once she opened it, there would be no returning to the version of Ethan Carter she had hated for so long. Olivia took a slow breath before clicking the attachment. The file opened almost instantly, revealing a scanned document followed by several handwritten pages. The first image was a legal agreement bearing her father's unmistakable signature. She leaned closer to the screen, her heartbeat growing louder with every line. It was dated 1 week before Bennett Manufacturing officially closed. At the bottom of the page appeared another signature she recognized immediately. Ethan Carter. But what truly caught her attention was a paragraph highlighted in yellow. The acquiring party agrees to retain all full-time employees for a minimum of 24 months and preserve existing retirement benefits. Olivia blinked. She read the sentence again, certain she had misunderstood it. That was not the story every newspaper had printed. She kept scrolling. Another page appeared, this time entirely in Ethan's handwriting. Your father refused every offer except the one that protected his people. He never negotiated for himself. He only asked me to save the employees and keep you away from the truth. He believed you would never forgive him for selling the company that carried your family name. He asked me to let you blame me instead. Olivia covered her mouth. A memory she had buried years ago suddenly returned with startling clarity. The night before the company closed, she had overheard part of a conversation between her parents in the kitchen. Her father had quietly said, "She cannot know. Promise me we will carry this together." At the time, she assumed they were talking about unpaid bills. She had never imagined they were talking about Ethan. Tears blurred the words on the screen as she continued reading. I argued with him for almost 3 hours. I told him the truth would hurt less than silence. He smiled and said a daughter can forgive her father one day, but she will never forgive herself if she learns he sacrificed everything because of her. I did not agree with him, Olivia. I only respected him too much to break my word. Olivia pushed her chair back and stood beside the window, staring into the rain-soaked streets below. Everything she had believed rested on assumptions, headlines, and unanswered questions. She remembered every harsh word she had spoken about Ethan to friends, co-workers, even strangers. She remembered telling herself that billionaires always chose profit over people. Yet the document in front of her suggested the opposite. She slowly returned to the table and noticed another attachment beneath the handwritten pages. It was a spreadsheet listing the names of every employee who had remained with the company after the acquisition. Beside each name appeared notes about promotions, retirement packages, scholarships for their children, and emergency assistance funds quietly established over the following 3 years. Ethan had not only kept his promise, he had expanded it far beyond the original agreement. Olivia felt something inside her begin to crack, not all at once, but enough for doubt to replace certainty. Just as she reached the bottom of the folder, one final audio file appeared with a simple label that made her hand freeze above the touchpad. Recorded the night your father asked me to disappear from your life. Olivia stared at the audio file for what felt like an eternity. Outside, the October rain continued to wash across the city, but inside her apartment the silence was almost overwhelming. She finally pressed play. For a few seconds, there was only the faint sound of chairs moving across a hardwood floor. Then her father's familiar voice filled the room. Older, tired, yet calm. Ethan, I am asking you for one last favor. Olivia closed her eyes as tears gathered before she could stop them. She had not heard his voice since the funeral nearly 2 years earlier. Another voice answered quietly. Ethan, if this is about hiding the truth from Olivia, I cannot promise that. Her father let out a weary sigh. You must. She still believes this company is her future. If she knows I chose to sell it, she will think I gave up on our family. I need her to believe I was forced into it. Ethan replied almost immediately. She will hate me. There was a long pause before her father spoke again. Yes, but she will keep loving me. That is a burden I am willing to ask only one man to carry. Olivia covered her mouth as tears rolled freely down her cheeks. Every painful memory she had carefully protected suddenly felt incomplete. The recording continued. I have reviewed every option, her father said. Without this agreement, we would shut down within weeks. Every employee would lose their job. Their retirement would disappear. Families who trusted me for decades would have nothing before Christmas. I cannot let that happen. Ethan answered with quiet conviction. Then I will protect them. I give you my word. Her father laughed softly, the same gentle laugh Olivia remembered from childhood. That is why I chose you instead of the larger corporations. They offered more money. You offered dignity. The recording ended with one final exchange that shattered the last piece of certainty she still carried. Ethan spoke first. If she ever asks me why I walked away, I will tell her the truth. Her father answered firmly. No. If she ever asks, you tell her nothing. Let time judge both of us. The audio stopped. Olivia remained perfectly still, staring at the dark screen, reflecting her own tear-filled eyes. 3 years. 3 years of resentment built upon a promise she had never known existed. She remembered every interview where business analysts had praised Ethan's leadership, every article she had refused to read, every chance encounter she had avoided because seeing him reminded her of everything she believed he had stolen. But according to the voices she had just heard, he had accepted becoming the villain so her father could remain the hero in her eyes. She returned to the recovered folder, searching almost desperately now. There were dozens of draft emails, each dated months apart, none ever sent. One described how the former Bennett manufacturing employees were thriving. Another celebrated the opening of a scholarship fund in her father's name. Another simply said, I saw your newest illustration in a bookstore today. I stood there for 20 minutes pretending to browse because I was proud of you. Olivia wiped another tear from her cheek as she realized Ethan had never truly disappeared from her life. He had simply been loving her from a distance, honoring a promise that had cost him far more than anyone had ever known. Then she noticed one final draft at the bottom of the folder, created only 3 weeks earlier, and her heart skipped as she read the first line. Tomorrow, I am leaving Boston. If fate still refuses to let us meet, this will be my last letter to you. Olivia opened the final draft with trembling hands, almost afraid that one more truth would completely change the life she thought she understood. The message was dated only 23 days earlier. Ethan had written it at 11:48 on a quiet Sunday night. Tomorrow I will board a flight to Seattle to begin the next chapter of my life. I told myself I would never leave Boston while there was even the smallest chance that you might one day want to hear the truth. 3 years have passed. I think I finally have to accept that some promises are meant to remain unfinished. Olivia felt her chest tighten. She kept reading. Every birthday, I wrote you a letter. Every Christmas, I drove past your apartment just to see your lights were still on. I never stopped because loving someone does not end simply because they stop believing in you. Tears blurred the words again, but she refused to look away. Ethan continued, I know you probably still think I chose business over your family. The irony is that your father taught me the exact opposite. He showed me that leadership means protecting people, even when nobody will ever know the sacrifice behind the decision. I tried to honor him every day. Olivia thought about the scholarship fund, the employee records, the retirement plans, and the quiet acts of generosity she had discovered only hours earlier. None of them had carried Ethan's name. None of them had been announced to the press. They had simply existed because he had chosen to keep a promise. Then she reached the final paragraphs. There is one thing I never had the courage to tell you before. Everything fell apart. I bought a ring the week before your father's meeting. I had planned to ask you to spend your life with me after your birthday dinner. It is still locked inside my desk because every time I try to throw it away, it felt like I was throwing away the happiest version of myself. Olivia's breathing became uneven. Suddenly, she remembered that birthday. Ethan had insisted on making reservations at the little Italian restaurant overlooking Boston Harbor. 2 days before dinner, the company collapsed. The celebration never happened. She had assumed he canceled because he no longer cared. Now she understood that the future he had imagined disappeared before he ever had the chance to ask the question. The final lines were painfully simple. If you ever discover this letter, I hope life has been kind to you. I hope someone loves your laugh the way I always did. And if that someone is not me, I hope he knows how lucky he is. Goodbye, Olivia. She sat frozen as the laptop clock quietly changed to midnight. For the first time in 3 years, she searched Ethan Carter's name instead of avoiding it. News articles immediately filled the screen. One headline caught her attention. Carter Dynamics announces permanent relocation of Chief Executive Officer to Seattle headquarters. Departure scheduled tomorrow morning. Olivia looked at the time again. Less than 9 hours remained before his flight. Her heart pounded with a single terrifying realization. If she stayed where she was, the man she had misunderstood for 3 years would leave believing she had never learned the truth, and the words he had never sent would become their final goodbye forever. Olivia did not stop to think. She closed the laptop, grabbed her coat, slipped the old flash drive containing every recovered file into her pocket, and hurried downstairs into the cool Boston night. The rain had eased into a light drizzle, leaving the sidewalks shimmering beneath the streetlights. She climbed into her car with trembling hands and searched for one thing she had never imagined she would willingly look up again. Carter Dynamics headquarters. The navigation estimated 24 minutes. Every red light felt unbearable. Every passing minute reminded her that Ethan's flight would leave in just a few hours. As she drove through the nearly empty streets, memories surfaced one after another. She remembered laughing with Ethan over hot chocolate at a tiny cafe during their first winter together. She remembered him stopping to help an elderly couple carry groceries without caring that reporters were waiting across town for an interview. She remembered the way he listened whenever she spoke about illustrating books for children, treating every dream she shared as though it already mattered. None of those memories had disappeared. She had simply buried them beneath years of anger. When Olivia finally reached the glass tower that housed Carter Dynamics, the lobby was almost empty except for a security officer finishing paperwork behind the front desk. He looked up politely as she approached, her hair still damp from the rain. "I need to see Ethan Carter," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. The officer offered an apologetic smile. "I am sorry, ma'am. Mr. Carter left the office about an hour ago." Her heart sank. "Do you know where he is?" The officer hesitated before answering. "He asked not to be disturbed tonight. Tomorrow morning, he leaves for Logan Airport before sunrise." Olivia lowered her eyes, disappointment washing over her once again. Then the officer studied her face more carefully. "Are you Olivia Bennett?" She looked up, surprised. "Yes." Without another word, he reached beneath the desk and carefully removed a small sealed envelope from a locked drawer. Across the front, written in familiar handwriting, were 3 simple words. "For Olivia only." The officer placed it gently in her hands. "Mr. Carter left this with very specific instructions. He said if you ever came here asking for him, I was to give you this immediately. If nobody came by midnight, I was supposed to destroy it." Olivia's fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a single handwritten note and an old brass key attached to a navy blue ribbon. She instantly recognized the key. It belonged to the observation deck on the top floor of the building, a quiet place overlooking the Boston skyline where she and Ethan had once spent an evening talking about every dream they hoped to build together. She unfolded the note. "If you are reading this, then somehow life has surprised both of us. I will wait on the rooftop until midnight, not because I expect you to come, but because hope has always been the one promise I never learned to break." Olivia looked at the clock mounted behind the reception desk. 11:46. She did not hesitate for a second. Clutching the key tightly in her hand, She rushed toward the private elevator, her heartbeat echoing louder with every floor it climbed, wondering whether 3 years of silence could truly be undone before the final minute slipped away. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the rooftop exactly as Olivia remembered it. The city stretched beneath a blanket of shimmering lights, the Charles River reflecting silver beneath the cloudy sky. A cool breeze carried the scent of rain through the quiet night. For one terrifying second she thought she was too late. The rooftop appeared empty. Her heart dropped. Then she noticed a familiar figure standing near the railing, his hands resting lightly on the polished steel as he looked toward the skyline. Ethan Carter had changed over the past 3 years. There were faint lines around his eyes that had not been there before, and the confidence the world admired now carried a quiet weariness she had never noticed. He turned only after hearing her footsteps. Surprise flashed across his face, followed almost immediately by disbelief. Neither of them spoke. The silence between them was filled with everything they had never said. Olivia took one hesitant step forward, then another. "I read the messages," she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment before giving a small nod. "I wondered if you ever would." She stopped only a few feet away. "Why did you never send them?" His answer came gently, without bitterness. "Because every one of them broke the promise I made to your father." Olivia felt tears gathering again. "You let me hate you." Ethan smiled sadly. "Some days that was easier than watching you lose your father twice." She shook her head. "It was not fair." "No," he admitted quietly. "But it was the choice I made." She reached into her coat pocket and placed the flash drive in his hand. "I know everything now. The agreement. The recording. The scholarships. The employees. The letters." Ethan looked down at the tiny drive before closing his fingers around it. "Then you know your father saved more than a company. He saved hundreds of families." Olivia nodded through tears. "And you protected his legacy while letting me believe you destroyed mine." A faint laugh escaped Ethan, though sadness remained in his eyes. "Your father believed that one day the truth would find you. I stopped believing that a long time ago." The rooftop fell quiet again as the wind gently moved across the empty space. Olivia remembered standing in this exact spot years earlier, pointing toward the skyline and telling Ethan that one day she wanted to write and illustrate stories that reminded people kindness still mattered. She had forgotten that dream after everything fell apart. Ethan had not. "You kept every promise," she said softly. "Except one." He looked at her with quiet confusion. "Which one?" She smiled through her tears. "You promised you would always tell me the truth." Ethan took a slow breath. "You are right." He slipped one hand into the pocket of his overcoat and carefully removed a small velvet box that looked worn from years of being carried but never opened. "I have been holding on to this for 3 years because I could never bring myself to leave it behind." Olivia stared as he gently opened the box. Inside rested the same simple diamond ring he had once planned to give her before everything changed. He looked at it for a long moment before lifting his eyes to meet hers once again. "There is only one thing I never wrote in those letters because I believed some words should only be spoken face to face." The little velvet box remained open between them, but Ethan made no move to kneel or offer the ring. Instead, he slowly closed the lid and smiled with quiet acceptance. "I bought this because I believed our future was certain," he said softly. "Now I know the future is something that has to be chosen, not expected." He slipped the box back into his pocket, surprising Olivia. She looked at him through tear-filled eyes. "Why are you putting it away?" Ethan let out a gentle breath. "Because after everything that happened, you do not owe me an answer tonight. You do not owe me forgiveness. You certainly do not owe me your future. I spent 3 years hoping you would simply know the truth. That is enough for me." Those words broke something inside Olivia far more deeply than any dramatic declaration ever could. She realized that the man standing before her was still protecting her freedom, just as he had protected her father's final wish. Even now, he refused to ask for anything in return. She stepped closer until only a few feet separated them. "You always let everyone else choose," she whispered. "My father, your board of directors, even me." Ethan looked at her with quiet confusion. "What is wrong with that?" A small smile appeared through her tears. "Because this time, it is your turn to hear my choice." She reached for his hand, the same hand that had written dozens of letters he never dared to send. It felt warm despite the cool night air. For 3 years, I thought every memory we shared had been a lie. Tonight, I learned they were the only part of my past that was completely real. Ethan remained silent, allowing her to continue. I kept asking myself why you never fought back when I blamed you. Now I understand. You were protecting the man I loved most in the world because you loved him too. She glanced toward the Boston skyline sparkling below them. My father used to tell me that character is measured by the promises people keep when nobody is watching. I spent years believing you failed that test. She looked back into Ethan's eyes. I was wrong. A quiet breeze swept across the rooftop as midnight approached. The city seemed to fade away until only the two of them remained. Olivia reached into her coat pocket and carefully removed the printed copy of Ethan's first unsent letter. She unfolded the page and pointed to the opening sentence. You wrote that fate might finally decide I deserved the truth. She smiled gently. Maybe fate was waiting for me to deserve you instead. Ethan lowered his head for a moment, overcome with emotion he had hidden for far too long. Olivia squeezed his hand. There is one message you never sent. He nodded. Yes. Then do not send it. He looked up, puzzled. She stepped even closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Say it to me. No more promises. No more silence. No more letters hidden inside old computers. Just tell me what has been living in your heart all these years. Ethan drew one slow breath, knowing that after 3 years of quiet sacrifice, the only words left were the ones he had waited his entire life to speak aloud. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. The city lights shimmered beneath them while the clock quietly crossed midnight, but neither of them noticed. His eyes never left Olivia's. I have loved you every single day, he said at last, his voice calm and steady. I loved you before your father asked me to keep his secret. I loved you while you hated me. I loved you through every letter I never sent. And tomorrow, whether I boarded that plane or stayed here, I knew I would still love you for the rest of my life. Tears rolled down Olivia's cheeks, but this time they carried relief instead of heartbreak. She gently reached into the pocket of his overcoat and pulled out the small velvet box once more. Ethan looked at her with quiet surprise, but she placed it carefully into his hands. 3 years ago, she whispered, life stole your chance to ask one question. I do not want another day to steal it again. Ethan slowly opened the box. The simple diamond reflected the lights of Boston, just as it would have on the birthday evening they never had. He smiled, not with the confidence of a billionaire, but with the humility of a man who had waited far longer than he ever expected. Olivia Bennet, he said softly, I cannot change the years we lost. I cannot erase the pain or the silence. But if you are willing, I would spend the rest of my life making sure every year ahead is filled with honesty instead of secrets. Will you marry me? Olivia laughed through her tears, remembering every unsent message, every quiet sacrifice, every promise that had been kept when nobody was watching. She nodded before she could even find the words. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, and for the first time in 3 years there was no hidden truth standing between them. Only hope. Several months later, the rooftop of Carter Dynamics welcomed guests once again, but this time there were no reporters waiting for a corporate announcement. Former employees of Bennett Manufacturing stood beside executives from Carter Dynamics, laughing together like old friends. Olivia's illustrations decorated the walls, each inspired by stories of kindness, forgiveness, and second chances. At the center of the room stood a framed copy of the first unsent letter. Beneath it was a small brass plaque that read, Some truths arrive late, but they still find the hearts that need them. Ethan had wanted to keep the letter private, but Olivia insisted it remain as a reminder that silence could protect people, yet truth was what finally healed them. Before the evening ended, Olivia quietly slipped one last envelope into Ethan's jacket pocket. When he opened it later that night, he found only a handwritten note. You never had to send the message. I was always meant to hear it from your heart. Ethan folded the note with a smile, knowing that after years of hidden words, they would never again leave the most important things unsaid.